Today, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, who is investigating housing in the UK, has called for the bedroom tax to be abolished in light of its dire impacts. We agree, and with independence we will abolish the bedroom tax. In the interim, we will continue to press the UK Government to abolish this tax and to increase the support for those hardest hit. We do not have legal or financial powers over welfare benefits, but neither are we a government that will walk by on the other side. Last week, Shelter Scotland put forward a proposition that focused on the problems people are facing as a result of the bedroom tax. To wait until the start of next year's budget would be too late for many of those currently struggling to make ends meet. I intend to take immediate steps to deal with the iniquitous effect of the bedroom tax. I have considered Shelter's proposal, and I have looked at what capacity there is in this year's budget to meet that need. Using resources from savings in my own enterprise portfolio budget and underspend on home energy efficiency from within the fuel poverty budget caused by delays with UK energy schemes, I can confirm that the Scottish Government will invest up to £20 million this financial year to help those struggling the most with the costs of the bedroom tax. This funding will enable local authorities to add to their own provisions to increase discretionary housing payments to meet some of the implications of the bedroom tax. Presiding Officer, our action on the bedroom tax shows the values and priorities that matter in this Parliament. Where Westminster decisions have cut spending, this budget supports investment and job creation. Where Westminster decisions have reduced incomes, this budget delivers a social wage that supports our people. Where Westminster decisions are driving the privatisation of public services, this budget protects our NHS. And when Westminster targets the most vulnerable as part of its austerity drive, we will do all that we can to protect them. This budget makes clear the benefits of decisions being made here in Scotland by those who care most about our future. That is the opportunity on offer to the people of Scotland in 2014. I commend this budget to Parliament.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you. We now move to questions on issues raised in the statement and tend to allow around 40 minutes for questions and answers, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question of the Cabinet Secretary to press the request to speak now, and I call Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement. Indeed, even earlier than that, the Cabinet Secretary sent his spin doctors out to brief that this would be a budget for independence. Honesty at last. Then we heard that an extra 10,000 Scots, an extra 32,000 young Scots have just joined the dole queues. And even the Cabinet Secretary realised that a budget for independence was the wrong priority, so he has dropped the slogan. But it is the same budget. It is a budget for independence. A don't rock the referendum boat budget for a Scotland at a standstill on pause. It is the wrong priority. Yesterday, a committee of this Parliament heard first-hand of the hardship faced by tenants who are victims of the bedroom tax. And I agree with the Cabinet Secretary on the iniquity of this tax. But I think those tenants, their priority might have been a budget to banish the bedroom tax from Scotland. Instead, Mr Swinney has found less than half the funds needed for the bedroom tax this year, in order to hide the fact that his budget itself has no provision at all to help next year. That means that councils will have to prioritise between the deserving and undeserving victims of the bedroom tax, and those are the wrong priorities. And next year, there is currently no promise of further help. So I simply say to Mr Swinney, this is, after all, a first draft of his budget. Will he take this budget for independence away and bring back a real budget for jobs and a budget which banishes the bedroom tax from Scotland this year, next year and the year after as well?
Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary.
I always find myself pointing out the fundamental incoherence of Ian Gray's arguments that he puts forward. But I don't understand how Scotland can be on pause when we have taken action today to do what we can within our powers to deal with and tackle the bedroom tax, and Ian Gray would serve his party better by unreservedly welcoming what the government has set out to do. And the reason why there is no provision in the 14-15 budget for dealing with the bedroom tax is I have absolutely no intention of letting the Westminster Government off the hook in 2014-15. It is the Westminster Government that has legislated for the bedroom tax, and whether the Labour Party is committed to getting rid of the bedroom tax, I watched 2 television programmes on Thursday night, and one Labour spokesman said yes, and the other Labour spokesman said no. So before the Labour Party comes here and tries to lecture me about the bedroom tax, I suggest they get some coherence into their argument and back us on the steps we are taking to tackle the iniquitous effect of the bedroom tax on the people of Scotland.
Gavin Brown, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for advanced sight of his statement. Today's budget should have been about the economy, particularly on a day when we find that 10,000 more people are unemployed in Scotland. But as far as the economy is concerned, this is a budget that has both under-promised and under-delivered. There was some encouraging news on the economy over the past couple of weeks. That, coupled with today's announcement, though, means it should have been a direct focus on the economy. So why, I have to ask the Cabinet Secretary, does he penalise business? Tucked away at the back of his budget on page 163, business rates go up from £2.4 billion this year to over £2.8 billion in 15-16. Almost £450 million extra coming out the pockets of business. Is this an idea? Is this an example of the benefits of decision-making being made here? How does he explain that on top of the retail levy and the empty property tax that he brought in? He talks about colleges, Presiding Officer. They used to get £560 million. This year they get 522. That's a pretty big drop. But because they're going up to 526 the year after, he says in his document, the funding floor has been increased. How on earth does going from 560 to 526 amount to an increase? And finally, how does he justify in these difficult economic times giving £115 million to Scottish Water in 2014-15 and £120 million in 2015-16? £235 million, Presiding Officer, that could be far better spent on capital projects across Scotland. This is a big disappointment, today's budget. If it was a film, Presiding Officer, it would have gone straight to DVD.
Sorry, Cabinet Secretary.
It was meant to be funny. It didn't impress anybody. I know. So, Mr Brown will have to keep practising, I think, on that one. Can I say that I find Mr Brown's narrative on the economy quite surprising, because I went through with considerable care in my statement some objective data over the last 12 months since I last delivered a budget to this Parliament on the performance of the Scottish economy. And just to reinforce the point, Scottish GDP growing at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom, employment at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom, unemployment lower than the rest of the United Kingdom, youth employment at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom. And a Bank of Scotland Purchasing Managers Index, which was published on Monday, which I thought was a very encouraging indication of the attitudes of people within the business community about conditions within the business, within the Scottish economy. I would have therefore thought that with all that evidence, Mr Brown would have given due credence to the fact that the government's economic strategy was having the effect that we set out 12 months ago that it would actually do in the circumstances. Now, on the question of business rates, I would simply ask Mr Brown if he's forgotten about the concept of inflation. Business rates every September are uprated in line with inflation. And if he needs to have an explanation about the increased business rate take that is happening in Scotland, if he wants a comparator for that, he need only look at the rest of the United Kingdom, where business rates are rising in largely the same kind of fashion because of the inflation uplift as is happening here in Scotland. On colleges, well, Mr Brown frequently comes to Parliament and argues that we should reform the public sector. And when we reform the public sector, what does Mr Brown do? Mr Brown complains about it. And when we save money as a consequence of reforming the college sector, while still providing the same full-time equivalent and the deep courses that people require to get into the labour market, I don't know what he's complaining about. And finally, on the question of Scottish Water, I know Mr Brown sometimes he comes to Parliament and is driven by the ideological arguments of his side of the debate. And it's an ideological argument about privatising Scottish Water, and I don't accept it. I'm on the other side of the argument, because I look at the benefits that customers, the length and breadth of Scotland, have experienced by improvements in the quality of service and reductions in cost that are good for the charge payers here in Scotland, and I think the approach and strategy, not to mention the enormous capital investment that's happening, the length and breadth of the country, not least of which in the city of Glasgow that the Deputy First Minister represents, is a tribute to the capital investment programme of Scottish Water.